I hereby call the meeting of the Ordinance Committee for Wednesday, April 26, 2023, 6:40 p.m. I'm Councilor Shirley Azak, and the committee is made up, the Ordinance Committee is made up of Councilor Rodriguez, Councilor Lally, and Councilor Farwell. So thank you for joining us this evening. We have our agenda. Madam Clerk.
Item number 1, ordinance. An ordinance amending Article 4, Division 4, City Clerk, and Article 4, Division 2, City Auditor, to establish the City Clerk as the Clerk of the Standing Committee on Finance. Invited to attend, Susan DeCastro, Ward 4 Councilor, Timothy Cruz, City Clerk, Karen Praval, City Auditor.
Committee, I was contacted by Council President DeCastro, and she is unable to attend this evening's meeting. She had a previous commitment, so she just wanted to let everybody know. Good evening, Mr. Clerk and Madam Auditor.
Good evening, councilors.
Good evening, councilors.
This is something that, actually going back to my days, we had started talking about quite a few years ago. I think most of you know that as the clerk to the council, my office sets up the meetings and I handle the city council meetings. The Finance Committee is basically a committee of the whole. And when the Finance Committee was first enacted, probably back in the early 1900s, it was much more of a financial committee than it is, even though it's called the Finance Committee. Right now, it's not the most efficient way to operate. We end up running the meeting, then we send everything to them it gets referred to finance. My staff is prepared and set up really to handle the nuts and bolts of the meetings, the open meeting law, advertisements, all that. I think the auditor will back me up. Her staff isn't really designed to do that, and it becomes an issue for them to do. Again, this is really, I think it's not something I came to you looking for, but several councilors, and I think every councilor, well, all of you have been council president. I think all of you know how difficult it is to try to connect with the auditor's office, who is busy trying to do payroll, doing all the items that the auditor's office does, trying to set up meetings, get invitations out in a timely manner for the, and the open meeting laws are very specific and they're not difficult to follow, but if you don't, I mean, and earlier this year, as you all know, we had to postpone a meeting because we didn't get it posted properly in time, and that was nobody's fault, other than there's too many hands in the pie right now. So I just think it's a smart thing to do, to have the clerk's office keep the whole process of the Finance Committee and the City Council meetings in one spot. And again, I'd be interested to see what the auditor says, but we've had this conversation, and I think she agrees with me. She'd be happy to have it stay in our office. She would still be the clerk to the Accounts Committee and still be the secretary to the to this committee, to the Finance Committee when needed.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, councilors. I agree with the city clerk in terms of what he says. I think it's a more efficient way to run the meetings. We do have a lot of interaction between the clerk's office and the auditor's office, getting, referred council orders, putting them together, send them out, doing all the mailings, all the petitions for all the different roads. So I do agree that this would be an efficient way of processing this. Within my office, our accounts payable, that we have one member that takes a lot of time out of their schedule, from paying invoices and reviewing vendor contracts to working on council order preparation every other week.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Committee, any questions? Council Farwell.
Just a very quick comment that the clerk was quite correct. This has been talked about for a few years, and Ms. Preval's office handles now, city budget's $513 million. That's $500 million. If you add in all of the grants, you're probably approaching $550 million that we have to audit, account for, and make sure that it's properly spent. And I think as those amounts increase, it just makes perfect sense to let her be more focused on an auditing function, and to allow the clerk, where all of the materials that come in go through the clerk originally, better to let him handle it. So I just want to make sure the public understands that this is not a criticism of what's gone on in the past. We're actually trying to do something positive proactively for the future because we realize the demands on the time of the auditor's office. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselors, any other
No,
comments?
my only concern was exactly what you just addressed in terms of, the auditor continuing to be the clerk of that committee for the purposes of running the meeting itself. So as long as that's the case, I don't have a problem with that.
No, actually, Counsel, I would become the clerk to the committee.
Okay.
And I would run the meetings so that the auditor doesn't have to be here.
Also, she wouldn't have to be here?
Wouldn't have to be here. Now, there might be certain times because under
Finance?
state law, she's still a secretary to the committee, but that wouldn't really, of course, the other thing too, when this was first designed over 100 years ago, the city didn't have a CFO. The CFO is really here at the finance meetings doing the answering. The reason the auditor was the clerk to this committee is because most of the questions were financial. There was no city CFO at the time. Back in the early 90s, the Chapter 324 created that position because we had run into such financial straits. The auditor was the end of the line for any financial questions. That's the reason
longer the
really
case.
why the auditor was by ordinance, and I think by state law originally, but by ordinance, the clerk of that committee. There's really no need. The nuts and bolts of the meeting, in fact, this Saturday and Sunday, I'll be away at a training on parliamentary process. The nuts and bolts of a meeting are what I like to think my office and myself, that's what we do. To have the city auditor here taking minutes and running a meeting is, personally, I think it's a waste of her talents and her strengths. And her staff could be, but right now she doesn't even have enough staff to get their work done. So when they're working, if they're working any overtime, they're catching up on payroll, on paying the bills, on keeping an eye. There are other things that I think most of you are aware of that you can ask the auditor to look into. As you do those things through the years, it's pretty tough to then stop and say, okay, now we have to put an agenda together, which is mostly already put together in my office. It's a matter of, moving, cutting and pasting, moving things around and having it in your hands in a timely fashion so that you can be looking at the items that are going to be on the Finance Committee agenda. So she would still be, I don't want to say she, the auditor would still be the secretary to the committee, but the secretary wouldn't really have much of a role in this. As the clerk to the committee, it would be just like the city council meetings. Myself and a staff member would probably be here to run the meeting, do the minutes. Minutes are so important, they need to get posted in a timely manner on the city website. And for her and her staff to be putting the minutes together, it's time taken away that is really better spent on their strengths, on their job. And it just makes sense. So she still will be the clerk to the accounts committee, and there is a stipend that goes with that, which she would keep. So she'd still be the clerk when the accounts committee meets, because that's all information that does come out of her office. If you came to us for that, I'd be going to her. In other words, it wouldn't make sense to have the clerk take over as clerk to the accounts committee, because I would just be going to her to get the information. In this case, so much of what comes before the finance committee now, in fact, I can tell you that former Mayor Harrington, when he was council president, had changed that committee name to the Committee of the Whole, because of the fact that it's really not just a finance committee anymore. He found out afterwards you can't really do that because it's set by ordinance to be called a finance committee, but it's really the Committee of the Whole. It's where you as a group investigate almost anything that, it's become a catch-all through the years. And so much of, I sit at meetings, finance meetings, and we're talking about things that don't have anything to do with the auditor's office. And it just seems like this is will be a much better way, much more efficient way of spending the public's tax dollars.
I agree.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other questions? So before we move on, I would like to just comment that having served as council president, I see that this would be ideal because the auditor's office was getting all the information from the clerk's office after our city council meeting, and sometimes things could, slip through between, the transfer of information. So I think this is really ideal, but I would like to thank the auditor and the auditor's office for all their hard work all these years for, running our finance meetings. So it's greatly appreciated, but this way you don't have to run around after us to get addresses for the invited guests. I think this would definitely be a more efficient way, and use that word, a few times. So I would just like to read, so Council President Nicastro, as I stated, wasn't able to be here this evening due to a medical issue, and she just wants to state that she understands that Clerk Tim Cruz will appear this evening, and that she is in support of this change, which is efficient and makes sense. So I told her I would read that into the minutes. So thank you. Did you want to say
Could
something?
I say something to the committee? I just want to let you know it's been a pleasure serving the counselors on the board. I've enjoyed this part of the legislative side of government. I've learned a lot, and, I'm always here if there's anything that anybody needs.
Thank you so much, Madam Auditor.
When will this become effective?
I would say once it's
Goes
an
back to the
ordinance
council?
change, so it'll take 2 more readings, and then once it goes back to the full council after the 3rd reading. So I would say that probably, maybe I should make sure it's after the budget process this year, but probably, I'd have to look at the dates, but when we get to the budget, it will probably be me that'll handle that.
Okay.
Well, if that's the case, here's my list of the invited guests for the next meeting.
Okay, I'll take that. We'll make sure everything gets to you in a
All
timely
right,
manner.
thank you.
We'll entertain a motion.
Motion to recommend favorably to the full city council.
Second.
A motion's been made and properly seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion carries favorably back to the full city council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, item number 2.
2, ordinance, an ordinance establishing the Wetlands Protection Ordinance to protect the wetlands, water resources, and adjoining land areas in the city of Brockton. Invited to attend, Susan Nicastro, Ward 4 Counselor; Rob May, Director of Economic Planning and Development; Megan Bridges, City Solicitor or her designee; Joyce Vohoris, Conservation Commission Chair; Megan Shave.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So I did receive calls and emails stating that a number of the invited guests were unable to be here this evening due to previously scheduled commitments. So I will ask for a motion.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Councilor
like-
Lally.
I'd like to move that we postpone this item to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
A motion's been made and properly seconded on the motion.
On the motion, to the next meeting, or just to postpone it and leave it alone?
I believe we have to,
Not necessarily, because Councilor Azak, you control the agenda. So if it's just not, the other committee isn't ready, the group's not ready at the next meeting.
I'll
Just doesn't make the
withdraw
agenda.
my motion and put a new motion in that says just motion to postpone this item.
Okay.
okay? And it's-
And I'll
Second.
second that again.
A motion's been made to postpone, and it properly seconded. All those in favor of postponement? All those opposed? The item is postponed.
Madam Chair,
Councilor Lally.
on item number 2, I'd ask that next time this comes up, we also remove Megan Shave's name from the list. She doesn't work for the city, but her name keeps showing up on it, so I don't
Yes,
wanna-
so just a point of information, Councilor Lally, we are aware she no longer works for the city, but because she had worked on this, we asked for her to be invited.
Okay.
But in this case, she may not be, because we have, in the meantime, we have hired a new conservation agent. Thank you. Madam Clerk, item number 3.
Ordinance, an ordinance amending and establishing a Department of Health and Human Services for the purposes of providing comprehensive health and human services to the residents of the city. Invited to attend, Winthrop Farrell Jr., Counselor at Large; Megan Bridges, City Solicitor or her designee; Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer or his designee; Dr. Eno Montessor, Executive Health Officer.
Thank you. I know that you've been working on this. Councilor Farwell, did you want to speak on this?
Yes, briefly, and then I would ask that we invite the solicitor to come up. By way of history, this first came up when Councilor Rodriguez served as mayor. And we recognized that we wanted to expand the scope and focus and function of the health department, because really in a city diverse and with so many different health issues, it just made sense for us to modernize our approach to what we were doing. You know that we've already set up an inspectional services department which will mold together health and building inspectors, but the work of the health department is really so much more than we're doing now. And frankly, and it's not the fault of Dr. Mondesir, who's here today, we've had dysfunction, I think we've had disruption in the level of services. The time is right for us to embrace a very professional Department of Health and Human Services with a medical director or a doctor, and you may remember we've already passed that home rule petition that would give us some flexibility if we can't find a physician to serve. You'll notice that there are some salaries in here for the commissioner. If my memory hasn't failed me, those were taken from some of the steps for the chief financial officer in our ordinance book, because if the chief of health and human services is a medical doctor, then I think we're going to have to compensate him or her appropriately. You'll notice that there are many different points that are delineated in here. One of them that I really wanted to ask you to take a look at is number 6. And I put in there that the department, the commissioner, and the department would oversee and assist the Commission on Women's Issues, the Commission on Diversity, which now will hopefully be the Human Rights Commission and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or any other commission or group by similar name and purpose, and such other departments as the mayor may recommend with approval by the council. So originally, and Councilor Rodriguez will remember more than I will, I think it was suggested that Veteran Services might be under that, the Council on Aging might be under that, but I didn't want to substitute my judgment, unless it's the will of the council, for what a chief executive might want to do. In other words, if the mayor recommends it and we vote it, fine, but I didn't want to jump the gun, so to speak, and make that part of this ordinance, because I thought we wanted to pause and reflect on it a bit, and all of you may have some suggestions. So straightforward, I'm just trying to be proactive. Dr. Mondesir has done the best he can under some very, very difficult circumstances. You know me pretty well, folks. I don't mince words. We've got some obstructionists, I think, within the health department that don't give Dr. Mondesir their full support and their full level of talent and ability. And you know what? That's got to change, because we've got 115,000 people in this city, and there are all sorts of issues like mental health, nutrition, communicable diseases, educating the public on vaccinations. God forbid we have another pandemic. I want us to be prepared, and I think the only way to do that is to now proceed into this next level of professional health services for the city of Brockton. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Did you want, Madam Solicitor, did you want to speak on this?
Good evening. Well, as Councilor Farwell said, and as you all know, this conversation commenced in 2019 under Mayor Rodriguez. And I think what was in front of you at that time were 3 pieces of legislation, one of which was voted in, 2 of which were not dealt with at the time. And then we had this conversation at some point in 2021, I think the end of 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And then most recently, you all took up the topic of the home rule petition and the special legislation on deviation. So from a high-level perspective, there's 3 things that are happening. Local acceptance of modification of the way that the Board of Health functions or the Health Department functions. Who's going to run that? And then the ordinance that you all set the policy on for how the department's going to run. So what's in front of you tonight is what was drafted by Councilor Farwell and captures it captures the design and the outline of the Department of Health and Human Services. And it doesn't really need to be any more specific than this because they're statutory functions, which are referenced in here. The only thing that's not referenced in here that doesn't have to be but is a part of the law is there's a 9-member advisory board that is implicit in necessary to being staffed. 2 of those folks have to be doctors. 5 of those folks have to be non-professionals that live in the area for the exact reasons that you talked about. What are the community health concerns? And those folks have to work with whomever runs the health department, and that's who comes up with the policy. And those people, the commissioner, as the ordinance reads, would be confirmed by you. So it's not just a mayor's hire, and they would be an ordinance employee. Because they set policy. Boston, Worcester, Springfield, Cambridge, Newton, Fall River, Somerville, Haverhill, those are some folks who have this type of organization already where they are. So this ordinance would create the health department and set its framework while the special act moves its way through the general court, and/or someone that's qualified under the existing statutory qualifications and requirements comes to fruition after you all create the position. From a high level, the department would be the Commissioner of Health, who would perform and exercise the duties of the existing Board of Health, an advisory council that I described, 9 members, 2 registered physicians, and the commissioner makes the rules and regulations, effectively the policy, and that's really in a nutshell what it is. The ordinance that it was filed is fairly straightforward, and it doesn't, and it provides a lot of opportunity to provide real community health and human services. And if there's any questions on it, happy to take them.
Councilors, Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I remember we had this long discussion and conversation when I was downstairs because I actually felt that, you know, boards of health works in little communities, not in cities. You know, cities actually have a health and human services department, and that's the reason why I actually had approached you at the time to basically look into molding this towards that. I, however, feel that those other areas that we had discussed needs to be part of this. And my reasoning, Council Farwell, is that I think it makes for a stronger application when we go after grants because they're not working in silos anymore. They're working under this umbrella, just like you'd have, you know, a DPW commissioner that oversees a bunch of other departments that were independent once upon a time ago. So if we include, you know, basically the Health and Human Services that's out of the mayor's office to be under this, if we put the Council on Aging under it, the Veteran Affairs under it, and then the functions of the Health Department under it in the sense that now we've got a bigger part in the sense that we can actually go after funding that's available for health and human services. And then, you know, you don't have the Council on Aging sitting here by itself trying to get something for its human services needs. So I think if we include that entire, now, the governance of those departments doesn't really have to change. What would actually change is just one more step before it gets to the mayor. You know, that whoever the Veteran Affairs individual is would have a direct line to the Commissioner of Health and Human Services, and then the Commissioner would have the contacts with the executive branch, or with the mayor of the city itself. Because I think it creates a bigger and better organization in a way that, because we're running into the problems with the health department today, it could be this in a few years from now with one of these other departments that we're dealing with, you know. Our communities are getting older by the minute, as you can tell by some of us sitting up here, a lot grayer in a way. I said a lot of us.
I'm sprouting them daily.
Yeah, it's, you know what, Home Depot is out there selling black paint, you know. But the reason why I'm saying this is that we want to be able to support that organization in the sense so that it gets the opportunity to go after real funding to look into real issues affecting people in this community, both the veterans and the senior population in the sense. And I think if they have a better structure in place, they'll have a lot more support than they currently have. Because right now, you've got, Janice and her crew, the Council on Aging folks, but yet there's no direct link up here to basically provide that support, the supporting cast that I think those departments will need to move forward in the sense. As a city, again, we're not a little town. Some of these silos might work great in some towns, but it doesn't work in cities. As you can tell, a lot of the cities that are even smaller than us are taking the steps to get into that, human services, the Health and Human Services Department. And I think that's something that we need to look into, including those departments in it, and make it a solid organization so that we don't have to redo this in a couple more years as we move forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Lally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had questions. I don't know whether they're for you, Madam Solicitor, for you, Dr. Mondesir, for you, Counselor Farwell, but just a couple of questions. With the position right now that Dr. Mondesir is in as the Executive Health Officer, that position is now under the Commissioner, but is that sort of being merged? Is Dr. Mondesir moving necessarily, or is this job just going to be put out like any other?
I mean, there's always employment and labor issues to grapple with and deal with in organizational changes. But the department internally could really be structured in a variety of ways. The way that what's in front of you now and what was in front of you in the past created an ordinance position to lead the department. And then it created a division of public health within that department. So, it would be inappropriate for me to speak about specific folks or who might be in specific roles. But what I can say is that there would need to be folks under whomever led the department with specific functions. Yes. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that does. Thank you. The second thing I had is the Board of Health, as it stands, has made some, they have the ability to some degree make policy.
Right.
They increased the age that you have to be to buy cigarette products or tobacco products in the city from 18 to 21, independently of the city council. And they have an informal embargo on licenses for things like, tobacco shops and things like that, that they alone have the power to enact.
Yep.
Would the new entity keep that, would they retain that power?
They would. And what I'd offer to you is this, is that the state law sets out the authorities, no matter what you call it, a Board of Health, Department of Health, Human Services. Chapter 111, is the main code. And that identifies the area in which they're able to regulate and set policy. What would be different here is that you would have someone at work every single day, as opposed to a 3-member board who meets, on a predetermined schedule, but, that I think is monthly, and then they take up the issues at that point in time because they all have other jobs. And so this is someone who's day-to-day, it is a single person who does have the similar authority. But unlike the Board of Health, the person who may ultimately lead the department would answer both to you all and the mayor. So it's a policy consideration on how you want it to function. It's concentration of power in one sense, however, it would be a day-to-day function. They would be able to do the person will be able to do the same things.
Yeah, fair enough. And then my only final question was, on the subject of, who fits under this umbrella, talking about moving Council on Aging and Veteran Services. I understand it. I'm not opposed to it because I do like the streamlining and the efficiency. I just want to know if, because they're subject of, this conversation, have the department heads for those departments been consulted?
Well, that's not what's on the table right now, so I.
Oh, I know,
don't wanna
I'm just saying,
speak-
if we, before we make any motion or, any action towards, putting another department within this umbrella, I just want to make sure that, that department head doesn't find out in an email. But that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Counselor Fowle, I just have a quick question. I want to make sure I understood what you just answered, Counselor Lally. So if we go this route and we hire, we hire a commissioner, human services commissioner, and then there's a 9-member advisory board. So will that 9-member advisory board have similar to what the board is now, the Board of Health, or?
The advisory board, so it is Chapter 111, Section 26C, for any folks who care to look it up. But the key word is advisory. In that, they are charged with the council shall meet quarterly, and additional meetings will be held at any time at the call of the commissioner, who shall act as the chairman. The advisory council of health shall advise and assist the commissioner of health. So they are charged by the commissioner, and they don't have authority in any sense other than advisory.
So it is a little different than what we have now?
Right. It's
Okay.
very different. Those folks have authority.
They do, okay. Very good, thank you. Counselor Fowle?
Yeah, just very briefly in response to Councilor Rodriguez, one of the best things about filing an ordinance and then having these meetings is that you flesh out improvements. And I do not disagree at all with combining under the Commissioner or the Department of Health and Human Services, the other agencies that you mentioned. And I do think that would give the mayor an opportunity to go to Washington, for an example, and perhaps extract quite a bit of funding. And I do hear my colleague, Councilor Lally's concern about the department heads. I would say to you that nothing would change. So let me just say, for example, the Department of Veterans Affairs was placed in the Department of Health and Human Services. That person, Ms. Young, her job duties, her salary, nothing would change. What this would do, though, it narrows the span of control for the mayor. And I will tell you in this city, because it's kind of wild and wacky, when you're the mayor, how the mayor ever ended up chair of the cemetery commissioners, I'll never know. Chair of the school committee, chairman of the Brockton Area Transit Advisory Council, and by weighted vote, whatever the mayor decides actually can happen. So organizationally, what I'm trying to say is we would make it a much more efficient approach to city government by just having that commissioner interact with those other department heads under him, and then be able to report to the mayor and say, you know what, we need funding here, this person needs help, staffing is needed over here. Anytime you can take the chief executive and perhaps remove some of the responsibilities so that they can focus on other more pressing responsibilities, it's a good thing. And then finally, someone asked about Dr. Mondesir. When I put this together, with much help from solicitor and also the conversations I remember from Mayor Rodriguez, I viewed Dr. Mondesir's position, not Dr. Mondesir, as if there is a commissioner, there'd be an XO. It's like having a captain of a ship. You'd have an executive officer, and that person would have those duties and responsibilities that the commissioner would assign to that person. And it could be similar to what he does now. It could be different. It could draw more on his academic background and professional training, or it would be whatever the commissioner, he or she, decides he should do. But I do think there should be that second level person. I think we found out with the building commissioner, we went years without an assistant or deputy building commissioner, and that was just nuts. And I don't want to do this with the Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other
No,
questions?
I agree in a sense, because that would be, the way I see it, that would be one of the blocks under that commissioner's block. You know, because we have nurses, we have nurses under that commissioner. Somebody needs to supervise the nurses or some of the healthcare individuals that we have on a day-to-day basis, in a sense, you know? So that block still exists for the health department in a way, as you would have these other blocks under that commissioner's umbrella, because I think it would make us a lot more efficient in looking more like a city that we should be looking, versus having a bunch of these little boards and commissions all over the place that, you know, frankly, people didn't elect, you know? And that's what sometimes we tend to forget, is that the councilors, the mayor, you know, we get the, you know what, kicked out of us on a regular basis, and yet decisions are being made by boards that are not elected by the people. And I think it's important that there's some accountability in a way where that Commissioner of Health and Human Service is accountable to this council, because we have the power, actually have the consent and the approval of the position, appointed by the mayor but consented by us. So there's some level of accountability that comes up this way as well, that person right now doesn't really exist. Honestly, it doesn't exist anywhere within that whole structure. So I think it's important for us to put that in play, so that we can actually have one person that we can drag in here and say, look, what's going on with this particular thing versus something else. So I think it's the way to go about doing it.
And
Madam Chair, could I, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I was going to suggest, rather than put legislative counsel on the spot, perhaps we could, oh, pardon me, perhaps we could have a brief recess to let her digest what we've just said, rely on the notes that I know go back to 2019, and then come up with an amendment that we could offer, rather than try to do it on
On the
live
fly.
TV.
Yeah.
Sure. So we don't need a
Call a
motion.
brief recess?
We're in a brief recess.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We're back from our brief recess. The discussion will continue. I'm not sure, did one councilors?
Madam Chair, could we have the Legislative Council read the proposed amendment, and then we can make a motion to adopt it? And
The proposed amendment will be to Section 6, which goes into what the department oversees, and we're going to include in that list the Public Health Division, which has the Advisory Council of Health, the Council on Aging, Human Service Division, the Homelessness Commission, Youth Council, Veteran Services, and Veterans Council.
all right, and Madam Chair, my only question then would be to the solicitor, if she's had a chance to just reflect on this, and does that comport with what we originally wanted to do back in 2019?
In my opinion and in my memory, the action that you're taking is in furtherance of what I understood to be the objective in 2019, creating a robust Health and Human Services Department that is sort of multifaceted and functional for the public. And this is more organizational in nature, really, than anything else. And in the hopes that it provides good policy and access for the public.
All right, and Madam Chair, one last question. In full disclosure here, I believe one of the department heads is in the union, the department head union, which is another whole issue that I want to tackle someday. So there will have to be some negotiation with the union with respect to having that department head report to a commissioner, am I correct?
Much like you all just dealt with inspectional services, that wasn't to be effective until July 1, 2023, in order to give the administration time to deal with the labor issues and anything tangential that comes from organizational change that you all have the authority to take. So that would really be my response, Councilor Farwell, is that there will most likely be labor matters that we need to deal with. And if this could be effective as of July 1 instead of this fiscal year, that would be helpful.
Madam Chair, I would suggest that be included in an amendment that this ordinance would become effective July 1st, 2023.
And that does not impact the other actions that you've taken relative to the home rule petition. Those things are happening on parallel tracks, but they're separate.
So for the sake of discussion, I'll move the amendment as reported by Legislative Council to include July 1st, 2023 as an effective date.
Second?
A motion's been made and properly seconded for the accept an amendment. All those in favor? All those opposed? The amendment passes.
So I'd like to make a motion that, huh?
Just, did you have any other questions, or no? I know I spoke with Dr. Montezir and asked if he had anything to add, and he said he would like to clarify something, correct, Doctor?
Madam Chair, good evening, Council. On the second question that Councilor Lally asked, I think I would favor adding a little information or sharing a little bit of detail, because when it comes to enforcing some of city ordinances, some of them intertwine or overlap with state ordinances as well as feds. For instance, one area, a specific area, is when you look at violations of individuals who buy, people who are under 21, who go to buy tobacco products. The city ordinances allows $100 fees. At the state level, it's $1,000 for first violation. The second violation is $2,000 with a number of days that the store has to close. Third violation is $3,000. So this is a huge discrepancy, and it allows the stores locally to really feel that the city is, the Board of Health is not really favoring them. But we cannot, the Board of Health cannot go below what the state or the federal government enforces. So this is a big issue, one of the areas. So I suggest that maybe as the new structure, as you move forward with the new structure, that you also consider some of the issues, and maybe I don't know how that works before COVID, but perhaps you may need to collect some information from the new staff you will have for the Board of Health, so that you can reconcile those areas where there are big gaps, in order to be able to make sure that we can have a more functional institution. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Can I just ask a quick question? If I could?
Councilor Rodriguez.
Dr. Montesir, could you come back up, please?
Sorry.
So when you were saying that the fines for the state are 10 times higher than what the city's fines are, so when we go to a store that's selling cigarettes to minors, in a sense, is that a state offense or is that a city offense, though?
It is both, but the fees, basically.
So the reason I'm asking is that your agents, your health agents will go to the store and basically fine those stores $100. And then what happens? Do we have a second fine that comes in to go to the state?
No, here's the clarification, the point of clarification. Thank you for Councilor Rodriguez. Before COVID, I think there was an MOA, or Memorandum of Understanding, between the State Department, the city, how this area would work. And so given that the city doesn't have enough inspectors, so the state covers inspections for many cities, including Brockton. So if the state inspectors warrants a violation, then automatically it's a state level
Violation.
fees. Right. So what happens is that comes to the Board of Health through the State Health Department, and then we collect the fee, and the fee goes to the treasury of the city. Now, if it is an inspector, city inspector, that warrants the violation, of course, it's $100, or, that's the discrepancy.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. All set, councilors?
Councilor Rodriguez raised a delicate issue, and I'll leave it there for tonight. There's a lot more to that whole process
Yeah.
that I think we need to flesh out.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So we'll entertain a motion.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend this ordinance favorably to the full city council with the amendments.
As amended, okay.
I'll second it.
Motion's been made to recommend this favorably back to the full city council as amended. All those in favor? All those opposed? It goes back favorably.
Cool.
Madam Clerk.
Item number 4, ordinance, an ordinance to rename the position of Superintendent of Public Buildings as the Commissioner of Buildings. Invited to attend, Moses Rodriguez, Counselor at Large, James Plouffe, Inspector of Buildings, Building Superintendent.
Thank you. Superintendent Plouffe stated that he couldn't be here this evening, but Councilor Rodriguez, you'd like to speak on this?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is basically a straightforward language change that I think is warrant for what we just did a couple weeks ago in terms of introducing some layers within that department. And a lot of us on this council, feel that it's warrant for us to have a commissioner of building versus a superintendent of buildings. Again, cities have commissioners of and not necessarily superintendents of. That actually is a layer below the commissioner. So I think it makes sense for us to change the ordinance to include a commissioner of buildings throughout the ordinances of our city. Again, to bring us up to the 2023 era that we all should be functioning in. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilors?
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second?
Motion's been made and properly seconded to recommend this ordinance favorably back to the full city council. All those in favor? All those opposed? It goes back favorably. Thank you, councilors. That concludes the agenda before us this evening. Is there anything else that needs to be discussed? No?
Madam Chair?
Council Fowler?
This didn't come out at the council meeting recently, but I actually want to say thank you to you, and I think it's the Garden Club and some others who went up to the snow clock and cleaned that whole area. That's a very historically significant area. So even though this is only an ordinance committee meeting, I just wanted you to know, as a Brocktonian, I appreciate your efforts and the efforts of Greg Belcher and the
Montello Business.
Montello Business Association and everyone else, so
Thank you. I know we truly appreciate, I appreciate them as well. These are business people or even, garden club members that took time out of their day to go clean up this little area. You'd be amazed how much trash was in this little area right under Snow Clock. So, thank you. We really appreciate their efforts. Thank you, Counselor.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
Motion's been made and properly seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, all those opposed, we are adjourned.
Amen.